Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
सम्माननीय आदरणीय दीदी,
कल की बात पुरानी, नए दौर में लिखेंगे मिलकर नई कहानी। हम हिंदुस्तानी, हम हिंदुस्तानी।
The month of July 2020, the country of South Korea, as how they do, honored a war veteran, the Korean War Hero of the Month. This happens every month, and so it happened in July as well. Except that man was not Korean. His name was Lieutenant Colonel C. Rangarajan.
Marking the 70th anniversary of the start of the Korean War, Seoul's defense chief attended a veteran event held in New Delhi on Wednesday. Chung Yong-do vowed to do his utmost to prevent horrendous wars and to protect the peace and prosperity of the peninsula, which he stressed would not have been possible without the sacrifices of Korea's brothers in arms in India. The minister awarded the Ambassador for Peace Medal to the participants, which included relatives of the late Lieutenant Colonel A.G. Ragaraj, the commanding officer of a field hospital in India. The hospital sent 627 medics to the peninsula during the Korean War, providing assistance to some 220,000 soldiers and civilians.
Lieutenant Colonel C. Rangarajan led the Indian medical mission during the years of 1950 to 53. That is the period of the Korean War. As the Papa War Rukwa the advertisements hit you, let us remind ourselves of a time many, many years ago when a Papa could not stop a war. And yet it somehow seemed much more humane. This gesture on the 70th anniversary of the war by the Korean government not only saluted the contribution of Lieutenant Colonel Rangarajan and his 60th Parachute Field Ambulance Platoon, PFA, a mobile army surgical hospital, MASH, but also was an acknowledgement of India's humanitarian role during that war. The 60th PFA had earned the name the Maroon Angels for their exemplary service in Korea. Numerous citations, including the Meritorious Service Citation from the ROK Army, the US Army Citation, and the Meritorious Unit Citation of the United National Commander, vouched for their significant work. It is estimated that the unit in their over 3 years of service in Korea performed 2,250 surgical operations. Going back in time, DMZ is a strip of land along the 38th parallel, 4 km wide, between North and South Korea. Following armistice in July 1953, southern half fell under United Nations, while the north was held by the North Korean Army and China. 3 camps on the south side were put with prisoners of war under the UN command. These 3 camps were named Hindnagar because at the end of the Korean War and after the armistice, the question of prisoners of war and what to do with them was still unsolved. So in November 52, the UN General Assembly, India proposed that there should be a creation of a neutral nation repatriation commission. The Neutral Nations Repatriation Committee then was formed under India, a country which was barely 5 years old. The other members of this committee were Switzerland and Sweden to represent the West, and Poland and Czechoslovakia to represent the communists. Nehru's decision was founded on his ideals of non-alignment. All 3 officers who were chosen to represent India were the best the army had at that time, and all of them were veterans of the Second World War. General Thimayya was the first Indian to command an infantry brigade, the 268th Indian Infantry Brigade, part of the post-World War II British Commonwealth Occupation Force in Japan. The second person in charge was General Thorat, who commanded the 2nd Battalion, the 2nd Punjab Regiment under the 51st Indian Infantry Brigade, and actually worked under General Thamaiya with great distinction. But finally, there was Lieutenant Colonel C. Rangaraj, who headed the 60th Para Field Ambulance. Many today fail to link the similarity of the para regiment lanyard to the one worn by the Medical Corps because they honor India's first paratrooper, Lieutenant Colonel C. Rangaraj. So, instead of armed battalions, India offered its assistance by sending a medical ambulance unit, as part of the UN command during the war, and only later as part of NNRC sent troops only and only to protect the prisoners of war. During Operation Tomahawk in March 1951, the second biggest airborne operation of the war, led by the 187th Airborne Infantry Regiment, Colonel Rangaraj landed with his detachment, all of whom adapted for an airborne role. There were many American casualties during that bloody landing, and the small medical unit, impressed by their commitment and professionalism, carried out 103 operations and saved up to 50 lives. The motto of the Indian troops was "For the honor of India." And India, along with Canada and UK, was also the mediator during the war. For perhaps the first time in history, the prisoners of war didn't want to go back home after the war. In fact, 88 prisoners of war were brought back, and many of them ended up settling in India. During their long tenure, the 60th was visited by many distinguished personalities from both sides: General Eisenhower, Chow En-lai, Lady Mountbatten. On 23rd August 1953, the 60th Parafield Ambulance joined the custodian force at the demobilization zone and opened treatment wings in North and South, both camps, to assist these prisoners of war who suffer psychologically due to the indoctrination, the war, and their injuries. The Korean People's Army, Chinese People's Volunteers, Neutral Nations Supervision Commission, and the Korean Military Advisor Commission formed a society called the Hindnagar Medical Society, and the location of the custodian force was called Hindnagar. By October 1st, 1953, the unit had established a hospital, mobile dispensaries, and medical inspection rooms. They never carried arms, yet they were more military than any other unit. They served and endured in far-off lands to bring cheer and hope to the victims of violence with their unstinted devotion to duty amidst toil, sweat, and blood. Indian troops that took part in the war received commendation from the Korean government. As I said, in July 2020, the Korean Ministry of Patriots and Veteran Affairs also named Lieutenant Colonel Rangaraj, the man at the helm of Indian forces, Korean War Hero of the Month. India's decision to lead the process of managing the security of prisoners of war was motivated by a belief in working toward a common humanity, to control the escalation of war and striving for peace. Over the course of the war and the initial months following the armistice, 627 members of the 60th Parafield Ambulance Brigade treated over 200,000 soldiers and civilians also from both sides, earning them the nickname Angels in Maroon Beret. Now let us look at the other side of the coin. We go to Goa.
When India finally took military action against Goa, which had been Portuguese for over 400 years, resistance was soon abandoned. Sikhs arriving at Panjim, the capital, after the Portuguese surrender, received a conquering hero's welcome from compatriots. Tiny Goa, all 1,500 square miles of it, was now added to the huge Republic of India. The takeover indeed had been virtually a walkover. Just before the takeover was accomplished, however, Portuguese troops had resorted in desperation to a scorched earth policy. All equipment that might be useful to the invading forces must be put out of action. The soldiers went at it with a will. Even if they realized their position was hopeless from the start, they may have got some satisfaction this way. But smashing up perfectly good vehicles makes a rather distressing picture to watch.
Goa is an integral part of Portugal, said the US Secretary of State John Foster Dulles in a statement in 1956. He also clarified that he was for a peaceful solution of Goa, but in his view and the view of the United States, Goa was Portuguese. By the end of 1956, the Indian government had reached an impasse on Goa. Nehru was determined that India, though very young, should act with responsibility and wisdom. But what such action should be was not clear, and the whole policy had obviously to be reconsidered after the elections that were due in the beginning of 1957. But till 1959, there was hardly any advance except the Prime Minister asserting time and again that Goa was part of India and bound to come to India, but and not how Americans think of it as part of Portugal. He did not, though, spell out how this would be made possible, though he counseled patience and pointed out the unwisdom of any resort to force. Nehru never ruled out the possibility of circumstances arising which might compel armed intervention. A few days later, he moved even closer to the possible use of force by stating that Portuguese were pushing the government of India into thinking afresh and adopting other than peaceful methods to solve the problem. There was immense pressure on Nehru from US and the West on Goa. Sensing this, Nehru tactfully avoided discussing Goa with Kennedy during his visit to the US in November 61. He even sidestepped the issue with British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan and declined to promise him that India would not in any circumstances resort to the use of force. The American ambassador Kenneth Galbraith warned Kennedy that Nehru might use force in Goa. Kennedy wrote to Nehru expressing his general concern at the use of force in Goa. The letter reached the Prime Minister's office on December 16th. Later on the same day, the US government came up with a fresh proposal, conveyed through Galbraith, that India should postpone action for 6 months to enable the government of the United States and perhaps other countries to help solve the problem. But on December 17th, Indian troops moved into Goa and within 26 hours, with minimum bloodshed, made it a part of India. After 400 years of colonialism. As expected, there was widespread condemnation in US and UK, but Nehru was unmoved. He wrote to Kennedy on December 29th. An aspect of this question which has troubled me greatly is the vast difference between the reaction in India, in Africa, and generally in Asia on the one side, and the contrary reaction chiefly in the United States and the United Kingdom. Why is it that something that thrills our people should be condemned in the strongest possible language in the US and some other places? Politics has a different face, looked at from different points of view. Please understand. The point was not lost on the young president, who was wise enough to realize what Nehru had succeeded with. A willing cooperation and total goodwill of the people of Goa. Without shedding any blood, he had merged Goa into India.
Flags, buntings and welcome arches lend a festive air to Goa. It is a festive occasion, for Prime Minister Nehru is visiting Goa for the first time since it became part of India in December 1961. His crowded program includes a laying of the foundation stone of a bridge across the river Mandavi. The bridge will link northern parts of Bardez with Panjim and other areas. Mr. Nehru also visits the famous Church of Born Jesus, which houses the holy relics of St. Francis Xavier. Then a trip to the ancient temples of Mangeshi and Shantadurga. Mr. Nehru assures the people that the distinctive individuality of Goa will remain. At Marmagoa, the Prime Minister goes round one of India's best all-weather harbors. In the wake of political freedom, Goa is striving to put her economy on a sound footing.
Kennedy, although in his response, said to Nehru that you spent the last 15 years preaching morality to us, and then you go ahead and act the way any normal country would behave. People are saying the preacher has been caught up coming out of the brothel. This also goes on to show the image of India, the image of Nehru in the world. Remember, Portugal was a strong Western nation with a broad base of support. But India then was also confident enough to tackle them with no fears. While India was poor and young, it still was seen as a country motivated by higher ideals. And Nehru commanded the kind of respect that can only be fantasized by the leaders of today.
Now, if I could choose from anybody alive, I wouldn't pick Jose. Nero, maybe, or Albert Schweitzer. Or Leonard Bernstein. But I am mad about Jose. I honestly think I'd give up smoking if you asked me.
In this audio that you just heard, this is a scene from Breakfast at Tiffany's where the main protagonist, Audrey Hepburn, is telling who would her ideal date be. The movie, released in the early 1960s, gives you a glimpse of how Nehru was seen in the world. She wanted to date Nehru. So, Nehru did command the kind of respect that can only be fantasized by the leaders of today. As you hear Papa Vor Rukwa, or you don't hear anything on Arunachal Pradesh in China, remember few politicians are prepared to go beyond the lowest common denominator and encapsulate the highest common aspiration that we can do. Nehru was one of them.
The cordial atmosphere of the greeting reflects the great affection and high regard in which the American nation holds the Prime Minister.
I wish to express, Prime Minister, on behalf of the people of the United States, our great satisfaction in welcoming you once more to our country, which you have visited in earlier days. So, Prime Minister, we welcome you here to the shores of this country as a friend, as a great world leader, as one who has, in his own life and times, stood for those basic aspirations which the United States stands for today. Prime Minister, we're glad to see you again.
Mr. President, Ms. Kennedy, I feel deeply honored and happy being here again and to receive this great welcome from you, more particularly not for the formal side of it, but for the friendship which animated your words. You have been good enough in the past also to refer to my country in terms which evoked a warm response in our hearts. I am grateful to you, sir, for your warm welcome, and to Mrs. Kennedy also.
In 1958, MLK wrote to Nehru, MLK meaning Martin Luther King Jr. This was a year before the two men met. King inscribed a copy of his newly published book, Stride Toward Freedom, to Nehru with the words, "In appreciation for your genuine goodwill, your broad humanitarian concern, and the inspiration that your great struggle for India gave to me and the 50,000 Negroes of Montgomery." King and Nehru met on 10th February 1959 at the Prime Minister's home. During that visit, Nehru and King discussed the possibility of Indian universities providing assistance for African American students. Nehru and King maintained a casual correspondence until Nehru's death in May 1964. In a telegram to Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, King said that the Prime Minister's death was a great loss to the whole world and that generation yet unborn will be inspired by his noble life. Writing in the Legacy of Nehru, a memorial tribute, published the year after Nehru's death, King said, "In all of these struggles of mankind to rise to a true state of civilization, the towering figure of Nehru sits unseen, but felt at all council tables. He is missed by the world, And because he's so wanted, he's a living force in this tremulous world of today.
कल की बात पुरानी नए दौर में लिखेंगे मिलकर नई कहानी हम हिंदुस्तानी